If it's not for the entrepreneur out there to think of the problem they're trying to address, put the time and effort into it, the consumer, you and I, are not going to be able to benefit. It's hard work, but it's absolutely rewarding to be able to service that marketplace. The benefit for the consumer is tremendous, and we've all enjoyed it with all the technologies we have access to today.
Hi, this is Jared Linson on behalf of Smarter Loans, talking to Larry Herscu, president of Easy Legal Finance. Thank you for being with us, Larry.
Thanks, Jared. Happy to be here.
So can you just start by telling me a little bit about Easy Legal Finance? For those who don't know, what's the company all about?
Of course. Easy Legal Finance is a specialty lending firm that specializes in helping people that have been hurt in an accident and are waiting for a settlement and need support in the interim.
Simple enough. What would you say is sort of the founding mission of the company? What inspired you to go down this road?
What our mission is and kind of what inspired us are almost one and the same. I'd almost call it synonymous. That we started this business because we saw that the legal process takes a considerable amount of time to reconcile. And people that have been injured, generally speaking, don't have any money and aren't working because they're injured. Yet the judicial process takes a long time, and there is no funds for them to put food on the table, to pay rent, to take the bus to go to the doctor, to begin that rehabilitation. So we started this business dedicated to helping people that have been hurt in an injury, who need support and are waiting for their lawyer to fight for a fair settlement. That's our mission.
I still want to ask about that because I imagine the average Canadian hasn't been in that position. They might have an impression that if you're injured and someone's at fault and there's a settlement that's been awarded to you, then your financial struggles are over, that, you're on easy street financially, even if you're dealing with other repercussions of that incident. What might the average Canadian not know about this process and the financial strain that exists for the recipients of those settlements, even when they're successful?
So, Jared, that's a great question. Most of us watch TV and we're familiar with the dramatization of being injured and going to court and getting a massive settlement. The reality of the matter is it's actually not the way it works. There is a long process of filling out paperwork, justifying the injury, and going through the negotiations to validate the injury that you have is in fact something that your insurance provider will pay for, even if somebody's at fault. And that process can take up to 3 to 5 years. Now imagine being injured, waiting 3 to 5 years, can't go to work, yet you still have all your bills, including your rent.
It seems like it's a pretty big problem. How did you sort of identify it as an area of need, and how did you approach coming up with a solution for those who are in that situation?
So we started this business back in 2013 because we heard of this need. And by way of background, many of my family members and friends are lawyers. And so we'd sit around the table, all of us talking about work. And what I found interesting is this dilemma. And this dilemma was not unique to Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary, but universal across the country. And what I learned through this process is the banks aren't going to lend anybody money without assets or without a job. And when do you need money most? When you are injured and you don't have a job and you have no money, which is when you need the help, you can't get it. And that's really what started the business idea, is filling this void.
And the solution that you found, you said you started the company in 2013. This is just around the time that FinTech is becoming a hot new buzzword and people are discovering the possibilities of financial solutions that are available using technology. What was the aha moment in connecting the problem that you had identified with the available technology at the time?
The situation that our clients find themselves in was really a scenario where the FinTech marketplace, whether it was 2013 or today, hadn't been able to figure out how to address, which is what is that additional source of data points that is atypical or non-traditional that they can get access to find a way to bridge that gap to help the average consumer. And that's a struggle because the asset class is relatively new and unheard of. And still to this day is a struggle for many people to look at this business.
Mm-hmm. And so can you walk me through the product a little bit and the process for those who are waiting for a settlement, having financial issues? How does it work? And exactly, what is the product or service that you're offering?
So we offer a variety of products and services. For the consumer, we offer what is sometimes referred to as pre-settlement financing or litigation financing. And what that is it's structured as a non-recourse investment in the client's claim. So if the client's been injured, we will provide them an advance against their future settlement. And the non-recourse concept means that we're 100% aligned to the client. If the client doesn't win their legal claim, then they don't have to pay us back their principal or their interest that they've loaned for us. And along the way, they don't have to make any payments until that settlement comes. And so generally what we do is we provide clients a stipend along the way to help reduce that income shortfall that they're facing because they're injured and they can't work until their settlement.
And I think it's evident in the way that you've described it, but I'm going to ask anyway. Why is this such an important service? How does Easy Legal Finance help Canadians in need?
Now, Jared, I think it's an important service because the studies that continue to come out show that the average Canadian are indebted more than 100% to their income ratio. M&P recently came with a survey saying 55% of Canadians are on the verge of bankruptcy. And in a scenario which is life altering, where you're injured and you can't work and you're already facing the financial pressure and struggles, it's challenging to be able to meet those demands while you're waiting for settlement, not able to work. And so what we do is by providing money to bridge that living expense gap, not to fund litigation, but to help people live until they get that settlement.
So it's not about funding the legal process, but funding day-to-day living expenses so that they don't struggle personally in that interim.
Correct.
And there's so many sort of different skills and areas of expertise that you need to bring into a FinTech company in the legal industry, finance, law, technology. What was your background prior to Easy Legal Finance, and how did it sort of set you up for the journey that you're on now?
So before I started the company, I actually spent my entire professional career in the asset management business and in finance. And so I understood the financial aspect of it, but what I had to learn from a FinTech perspective was all the business technology related aspects. Because of the nature of the specialization of what we dealt with, there were no lending products to be able to help us start the business. There was no access to data to try and evaluate the nature of the claim in order to help the plaintiff that was injured. And there was no tool that we were able to utilize to create a beacon score or a scoring mechanism. And so what we had to do is we actually had to build up our own equivalent of our FinTech model here by building up the technology to be able to do the intake, adjudicate the claims with atypical data that's not readily available, figure out how to score it, how to price it, and then how to be able to manage it, which was an exciting, interesting task for us. All of those tasks at the same time where clients would come to us looking for help.
Usually when an entrepreneur describes the process as exciting, what they mean is terrifying. And I'm curious if you could maybe shed some light on some of the bigger obstacles that you've had to overcome over the years. And also as a follow-up, whether entrepreneurs today are facing similar obstacles or if there's more infrastructure that would make the process easier now.
So, Jared, I think there's probably three things if I look at our history of the challenges that we face that were frankly terrifying. The first issue that we faced was we were starting a business model that nobody had ever heard of in the Canadian marketplace. If you build upon that, the nature of our business was atypical to a typical lending company. Can you imagine going to a traditional lender and saying, hey, I'd like to borrow some money. I won't make any payments. I don't have any credit. I don't have any assets to give you. Trust me. And oh, by the way, you're going to have to wait 3 to 5 years to know whether or not you're going to get paid. And if I lose, I don't want to pay you anymore. That was the second biggest challenge that we faced. The third biggest challenge after we got over those two was how do you manage it? And how do you collect the necessary information to actually adjudicate it and adjudicate it properly to be able to manage the risk from a risk perspective and a business perspective? And then ultimately, what platform do you run it on when this doesn't exist in the Canadian marketplace? And there's no existing service providers to help you with the data. That was a challenge that we faced, which is why I think it was exciting.
And the sort of follow-up question, entrepreneurs that are looking to build FinTech products today that are unique from what's currently on the market, would you say that they are similarly starting from scratch, building the infrastructure out for themselves, or has a lot of that groundwork been done? And would it be easier for you to introduce an innovative product to the market now compared to 7, 8 years ago when you did?
I think anytime an entrepreneur is trying to build a business, they've identified a need. And if they've identified a need, that means there's a gap in the marketplace. And irregardless of the technological investments that have been made, the ancillary companies that have been created to support that entrepreneur, they've identified that gap and they're going to face a struggle. Is it going to be hard or easy? Depends on how big the gap is they find. But anytime you're trying to fill a gap, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun. And you're really trying to address a need in the marketplace, which is ultimately good for the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that you had a background in finance. And as we sort of discussed, this business that you have now is a combination of your finance background as well as a lot of technology and the legal industry, which you said you had some exposure to in the family. Those aren't exactly easy areas of expertise that you can develop quickly. Was it difficult to get up to speed on the law and tech side of the equation?
Absolutely. We were trying to marry well-established industries, legal, technology, and finance, and we were trying to bridge the gap. And it was an unbelievable struggle and continues to be to translate each of the vernacular and the way the three different industries look at it to create the commonality to be able to service that gap. And still to this day, as we continue to build and grow our company, we are finding it challenging to bridge that gap, but we are slowly persevering and addressing them as they come up.
Do you find that they're starting to speak the same language, or is it still very much three very distinct sort of cultures and communities that you're working with?
I think there's the language of vernacular starting to come together, but not as rapidly in the community that we deal with in the legal FinTech world as it might exist in the finance world. And I think at the core of it is access to data. Our judicial system does not have a central repository that is responsible for data and has ownership of data. There's 4 licenses in Canada who have access to data, and the laws do not allow them to aggregate it. And in the absence of the aggregation of data, it makes that struggle between finance and technology and legal really tough to come together without that common starting point.
Bringing that back to the company itself, internally, I imagine you have expertise working with you from all 3 departments, tech, law, and finance. How do you build a team in a way that doesn't become too siloed, where each has its own corner of those 3 and don't interact well with each other? How do you ensure collaboration between the tech, finance, and law expertise that you have in-house?
I think building a company is no different whether you're in our industry or any others, is trying to leverage everybody's expertise to come together to build a culture, to build upon the expertise, to generate ideas and come together. It's really the sum of the parts. I think that's made us successful by taking those 3 different skill sets and constantly challenging ourselves to bridge those gaps and to enhance our technology in order to be able to create leverage to grow and ultimately help the consumer.
Now, you've found somewhat of a niche within the fintech space, and clearly things are working out well. What advice do you have for others that have a specific idea in mind, a corner of the market that isn't yet being serviced and want to offer niche services?
I think what we've learned through our journey is when you identify your niche is to identify the size of the market opportunity. And then after identifying the size, what we do is to try and identify, is there truly a need? Or is it more of a want? And as you start going through that filtration process of identifying that addressable marketplace and the need versus want, and then the third part of it is, can you bring it together on an efficient model? Is there a way to create disruption in that industry by bringing together the different subsets of specialty, in our case, finance, legal, and technology, in order to do so? And that's a tough challenge to overcome.
Do you consider yourself a disruptor?
I think we are a disruptor. I think we're a disruptor because I think we've created a subset of an industry that provides loans against an asset class that is really tough to understand. It's really tough for a traditional lender to price, and even tougher to figure out how to be able to bring the necessary skill sets in order to support that model on a go-forward basis.
So what are some of the challenges associated with being a disruptor? It sounds like that's something you wear with a badge of honor, but I'm sure it's not always welcomed. What are some of the opportunities and challenges of putting yourself in opposition to the status quo?
The opportunity is ultimately to service that addressable marketplace that you find that gap exists for. In our case, it's people that are injured and waiting for a settlement following the legal process. The challenge is when you do it, often there's nobody to talk to. You're on your own. There's no technology to figure out how to be able to create and support that infrastructure of that need. And in our case, it's a significant need when we think of the amount of people that have been injured on a daily basis and the fact that the credit income to debt ratio in Canada is so tough. The benefit is when you can pull it together, it's the client at the end of the day that gets service that counts.
So you've gone through sort of the building phase, the proving the concept. You're now very well established in the market. What comes next? What do you have your eye on in the future?
So what we've seen is the gap that exists with people that are injured extends beyond the plaintiff. The nature of the subset of the marketplace we deal with extends to multiple scenarios, whether it's a lawyer who's helping the plaintiff. The lawyer works on a contingency basis, which means the lawyer's vested interest is directly tied to the success and the outcome that the plaintiff has. And with COVID and the courts being closed for the better part of a year and the significant backlog that exists in the court system, that creates another vertical for us. And that vertical is helping lawyers bridge this financial gap as they wait to help their clients. And if you take that one step further, well, the plaintiff has to go see a doctor. The plaintiff can't afford to pay the doctor. The lawyer who doesn't get paid on an hourly basis but wastes a settlement, they can't afford to pay the medical professionals that are helping through the rehabilitation process for that person that's injured in that car accident. That creates a third vertical for us where we're now starting to work with a plethora of medical professionals, doctors and chiropractors and physiotherapists and surgeons that are helping people that have been injured that need to get paid for the medical services while they wait for the settlement. And with COVID, it's just making it longer. And that just creates expansion opportunities for us to be able to fulfill that gap that is not being fulfilled by the traditional lenders in today's marketplace.
Mhm. So, of course, you're already dealing with highly advanced technology, the legal industry, finance, and you thought, you know what, let's throw medicine in there too, just to make things simple.
Exactly.
Are you finding it a challenge to break through to that new community, to that new niche, or do you find that there's a big need and that you're being sort of welcomed with open arms?
So we found that it's a big need in the marketplace, but like any time you break into a new niche marketplace, you have to learn a whole new vernacular and you have to learn an entire new process of the way it works to figure out if, again, we can address the gap. And so far, our initial response has been tremendous, where the medical community that's provided that service to the professional that can't charge it to owe him needs to get paid because ostensibly they're a small business unto themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're very open to these ideas on how we can help them bridge their gap to pay for these bills while their client, the plaintiff, who's been injured, ultimately is waiting to get paid from whomever the party is that injured them.
As you said earlier, you consider yourself a disruptor. What advice do you have for other aspiring disruptors out there, folks that have an idea for something that doesn't exist currently and by definition sounds crazy to a lot of people because it doesn't exist?
I would encourage entrepreneurs who are thinking about heading down this path, ask questions, do your research, really understand if there's a demand in the marketplace and understand what the gap is and how you can service that gap and recognize if you've identified that need and you want to go down this path. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of struggles, but the benefit is the success of that addressable market that you're identifying and filling that no one else has done that will offset all of the hours and the time and the effort you put into this.
Do you anticipate more technology in the legal industry and specifically in terms of filling some of the financial gaps as you have in the future, or are we nearing the limit of the FinTech's ability to assist in the legal industry? It's generally an industry that's closed off to technology innovation simply by the nature of the business. It's a very traditional industry. Is there a lot more opportunity to maneuver within the legal practice to find opportunities to help clients in the legal system? Or do you feel like there's a limit to how much you're able to get in there, given that it's such a traditional closed system?
I think the legal fintech community is really only in the starting phase. If I use a baseball analogy, I think we're in the third inning. We haven't even begun the game yet. There are some amazing entrepreneurs and disruptors in the Canadian marketplace who see this as the last bastion of change and growth. And I think the runway is only going to begin, and the opportunity to service not only the legal community, but ultimately the service of the plaintiffs that use them, no matter which aspect of the legal community, is being fast-tracked because of COVID. COVID has resulted in forcing all of the various different parts of government to figure out how to deal with technology, how to use Zoom, how to digitize things, how to use electronic signature and delivery. That just creates tremendous opportunity for the entrepreneur. And ultimately, it creates tremendous service benefit for the consumer. And so I think there's a great runway ahead of them.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of what you're doing today was enabled by data that you had to sort of build the infrastructure in order to collect and utilize. Do you think that because of COVID, because of this widespread switch to remote work and the increased utilization of digital tools, that the data that is being generated will lead to new opportunities in this specific niche in the immediate future as a result of COVID?
I think COVID will create the foundation or the genesis for the change. I don't think we're there yet. I think the courts are starting to invest money in technology to create the digitization and move forward. But I think fundamentally the foundation needs to come from the government to create somebody to oversee access to data and making that data generally available to be searched through an API, to be able to be aggregated, to be analyzed, to be able to service the end consumer. And we're not there yet. But I think it will come. It's come in other jurisdictions, just I think a matter of time before it comes here.
So to make things, again, simple on yourself, you're getting into bureaucratic red tape as well as medicine, law, finance, and tech.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a fun mission. Larry, that's all the questions that I had prepared for you. But before I let you go, I just want to ask if there's anything else that you think would be interesting or important or worth discussing before we wrap up here.
The one thing that I would maybe offer as a closing comment, Jared, is for any entrepreneur that's looking to go down this journey addressing a need in the marketplace, I would encourage them to do so. If it's not for the entrepreneur out there to think of the problem they're trying to address, put the time and effort into it, the consumer, you and I, are not going to be able to benefit. It's hard work, but it's absolutely rewarding to be able to service that marketplace when you figure out how to address that market, whether it's our market, which is legal and finance and technology, or any other market that the entrepreneur is looking at. The benefit for the consumer is tremendous, and we've all enjoyed it with all the technologies we have access to today, that I would encourage people to continue pushing the envelope where they can.
It sounds like you found a very satisfying business model that is not only working out for you and your business itself, but for the clients as well, that you're able to do good while doing good.
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Larry, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Jared.